Here we go. Actually, you know what? I'm going to take a drink before I get into this. This is going to be a lot. All right. College football playoff rankings dropped Tuesday night. I got a lot to say about it because you know what? It looked like the committee just Googled college football standings, looked and saw who had the top records, slapped it on a ranking, called it a day. And allow me to refresh your mind on these rankings here. Number 1, Oregon. 2, Ohio State. 3, Texas. 4, Penn State. 5, Indiana. 6, BYU. 7, Tennessee. 8, Notre Dame. 9, Miami. 10, Alabama. 11, Ole Miss. 12, being left out of the playoff, Georgia. We'll have a lot to say on that. Number 13, Boise State. Oregon and Ohio State 1 and 2 totally makes sense. Number 3 is where I start to ask questions. Because when you go to a restaurant, and let's say you order wings, you want there to be meat on the bone, right? Where's the meat on Texas's bone? Who have they beaten? Their best win is on the road against Vanderbilt, on a neutral maybe against Oklahoma, and apparently beating Michigan matters a lot because Indiana moved up 5 spots for doing that. But Texas is sitting at number 3 with not a single elite win to show for. Number 4 brings me to this one. Penn State. Because Penn State, like Texas, has no win to show for. They've beaten USC on the road, in which they had to come back and beat barely because Miller Moss threw a pick in the last minute, and Illinois, which that was a really close game up until the fourth quarter. So I have to ask here, because number 3, at least Texas has looked good while blowing out a lot of these teams. Penn State beat Bowling Green by 7 points. Penn State barely beat USC. Penn State doesn't have a single win against a top 25 team, and yet they're at 4. What are they doing ahead of an undefeated Indiana? Ahead of an unbeaten BYU who has a win over SMU, might I add? What are they doing against a one-loss Tennessee who's played a substantially harder schedule, who has a win against Alabama? What are they doing? A lot of these teams, I could go on. What is Penn State doing it for? And number 5, Indiana. I can see the logic. I can see the vision there. Should not be below Penn State by any measure of the imagination. But here we are. Penn State, Indiana's unbeaten. Yes, they have played the 100th strength of schedule, but they've blown out teams at least. BYU, number 6, the win over SMU. I mentioned Tennessee, number 7. Probably the only SEC team that's consensusly fairly ranked, according to the public. Number 8. This one gets me. Notre Dame. Because in the top 6, it's clear the committee has set a precedent and a criteria here. No bad losses. No losing to teams that you shouldn't. All 6 teams listed have not a single bad loss to show for. And then you rank Notre Dame at number 8, who has a loss against Northern Illinois, thus abandoning your entire objective criteria that you set for in the top 6. What are we thinking here? What is the cause for Notre Dame to be a top 8 team in the country? They've played the 73rd hardest schedule in college football. I get it. They beat A&M on the road. It was week 1, and A&M is playing a different quarterback currently. After that, yeah, a 3-loss Louisville is probably their best win. The Northern Illinois loss and no elite win makes you question, what is Notre Dame doing at number 8? Number 9. Miami. Miami has a bad loss, or not a bad loss, but a certainly not good loss against Georgia Tech. Miami's best win is either a 3-loss Louisville or Florida. And they're sitting here at number 9. Thus again, abandoning the precedent that you set in the top 6. Number 10, Alabama. Sure. 11, Ole Miss. Okay. Number 12, Georgia. Georgia is 7-2. Georgia has played the hardest schedule in the entire country, according to the ESPN FPI, according to the Triple H model, according to SB Plus, you name it. They've played the hardest schedule, substantially. They check every box. They have elite wins. They beat Texas, who, by the way, you claimed is the 3rd best team in the country, on the road by multiple possessions. They demolished Clemson 34-3. Their 2 losses are against Ole Miss on the road and Alabama on the road. They don't have a bad loss. They have great wins. They've played a gauntlet of a schedule. And by the way, they are 3rd in the country in strength of record right now. So I have to ask you, College Football Playoff Committee, what exactly is your logic here? What's your precedent? What's your criteria? Because this ranking is incredibly wishy-washy. There is not an objective criteria that you've set here. But there is one thing that you've made clear, and it's an incredibly dangerous precedent, in my opinion. You haven't accounted for strength of schedule. You're saying we prefer teams who don't lose bad games over teams who have big wins and schedule big games. And that, in my opinion, sets a dangerous precedent for the sport and the future of college football for 2 reasons. One little one, one big one. The first one, week 1, we got Georgia versus Clemson. We got LSU versus USC. We got all these big games. Well, all of a sudden, those 2 schools could be looking around saying, you know what? Based on what the committee's doing here, they're going for record here. They've set a message. We're not going to schedule these games because we don't want to lose them. So instead of getting Georgia versus Clemson, you'll get Georgia versus McNeese State, which, hey, week 1 was a lot to look forward to for a plethora of reasons. We got big games. Texas A&M could be saying the same thing, saying, okay, committee, you've made yourself clear. We're not going to schedule these big games. We're going to go against them, and we're going to schedule cupcakes, just like Indiana did, just like Ohio State did. There you go. Just like Notre Dame did, other than A&M. 2, this one is the biggest one right here. All of a sudden, Greg Sankey is saying, okay, you've made yourself clear. In his eyes, you don't know how to properly evaluate the SEC. You're ignoring the fact that I have it right here, that 9 of the 11 hardest schedules, according to the ESPN FBI, are SEC teams. Do you know the brand that you could piss off here? Do you know? Because, man, 12 of the 15 most watched games this year are SEC games. And in terms of the big noon slot, which, by the way, Fox owns, did you know that 5 of the last 7 weeks, the most watched noon game this year, has been on ABC? So all of a sudden, Greg Sankey could be saying, all right, committee, fine. You don't know how to evaluate us? You don't know how to account for strength of schedule for big wins? We'll start our own thing. Because that contract that the SEC has with the playoff committee is up in 2026. And Sankey could all of a sudden say, all right, fine, we're going to start our own thing. And the sport could be just back where it was in 97 or whenever it was before the BCS without a national championship game. He has the power to do that. Just saying. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but I'm saying this is a possibility because the committee right now is clearly still evaluating this like a 4-team playoff. They're saying, okay, you lose 1 game, we'll let you in. You lose 2 games, you're going to be in a bad spot regardless of the context. Well, when you let 12 teams in, you're letting more things into the picture. And all of a sudden, there are things that matter more. Because you're saying in this logic, by this ranking, you're saying to the SEC, the team that has had the highest conference win percentage in college football for 17 of the last 18 years, responsible for a massive chunk of viewership, saying, we don't know how to properly evaluate you in Greg Sankey's eyes. And Sankey could easily say, deuces, we'll do our own thing. We'll do our own thing. And one thing as well, in the Big Ten is how it's setting up super well for them. In the SEC, you have schools like Arkansas who can go out and beat Tennessee. You have South Carolinas. You have Kentucky's. Teams that still have a lot of talent. In the Big Ten, there are no Arkansas. There are no South Carolinas. There are no Kentuckys. There are no Vanderbilts. In the Big Ten right now, there is a high tier and then there is a massive tier break below that. And right now, it's an illusion that the committee is seeing and completely taking the bait. If I'm being completely honest with you, I don't usually get opinionated on the show. I think now is the time because I see this as a hole in the sport that could easily get filled with something that the viewers won't like to see. And man, a lot of people, last point here, and I'll end this. a lot of people in the committee and the media throw around eye test. You know, this team was good on the eye test. This team was good on the eye test. This team wasn't. To the selection committee, you're in a very powerful spot. You're in a God-given spot that a lot of people would love and kill to have. And you mentioned eye test. So you have a social media. Social media is here for a reason. Show us. How do you break down film? What's your eye test criteria? What does it consist of? Because right now the fans are being left in the dark, folks. The fans don't know how you break down this. How did you get to the conclusion where you rank all the 6 teams that have no bad losses and rank Notre Dame and Miami right afterwards and leave Georgia out of the playoff, who does not have a single loss, by the way? A single bad loss. Typo. Major typo. How do you get to that conclusion? Because, you know, you have a social media. Maybe you go on Twitter and say, this team needs to do better on this film, on this part of the game. They need to be better in order to be a playoff team. Show us. The fans would love to see it. That's my spiel. I'm out.